welcome back, PM Peeps, to PM Corner. It is great to see you again. Hope you enjoyed the last video. Today's topic is going to be a little less heavy than last time, so hopefully it'll be very enjoyable. But before we begin, if you like the content that you're watching / listening to, please feel free to subscribe to our channel on YouTube and or Spotify. You can also follow us on Twitter, where you can find out when our next streams are coming in, when our next videos are going to be posted to both YouTube and Spotify, and other relevant information. So now that we've got the introductions out of the way, before we even get started about what our PMP topic is going to be, we still have to talk about PMP moment. After all, this wouldn't be a project management channel if we weren't talking about project management concepts. So of course, as you see on the screen, those for you that are watching on YouTube, for those of you who are not watching on YouTube and listening on Spotify, we are going to talk about scope management and lessons learned. Now, if you recall from other videos where I've talked about how important lessons learned is, it's part of the 7 key items I always emphasize on whenever I talk about project management and whenever I talk with my students about what they need to keep in mind as they continuously go through learning the different concepts. Lessons learned is always applicable no matter what project you're on. I just like emphasizing it because it makes sure that people understand that you always reference back to that, because you can always learn something very interesting and new from lessons learned from previous projects. But scope management is the other PMP moment. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, why scope management? What is so important about scope management? Well, in scope management, per the PMBOK, right, we have to understand what it is exactly we're doing for our client, right? And this can expand and vary depending on what it is your client has asked you to do. So for software development, right, it could be a website, a whole new system, be a bunch of server farms. It could be a mixture of all 3 that I just mentioned. Others, it could be construction, how to build maybe a 20,000 foot tall skyscraper, or how to build a huge mega mansion with a built-in movie theater. At the end of the day, we have to understand the scope of the work we are doing. This also means we have to understand how scope management may incorporate repurposing things and also preservation. Now, when we want to repurpose things, we have to really think about why we have to repurpose something, or why should something be repurposed. And that's because sometimes things become obsolete or overcome by events, or if the acronym, if you want, would be OBE. And so we have to sit and go, okay, is it still relevant or not? And that comes from, in the real world now, not talking from the PMBOK perspective, where we have to do discovery analysis. And that can be part of collecting requirements as well. But in the real world, we tend to want to do discovery analysis to better understand what it is exactly we're dealing with, right? You're not going to necessarily want to do collection of requirements until you understand what it is you're facing. That comes with upgrading a system, making something completely new, or integrating something old into something new, like the virtual case files for the FBI as an example. That was trying to integrate an old system and an old way of doing things into a new system with more improved methods. So the same thing applies to really a lot of many projects that require that. And you're going to see when we talk about that, our topic as well. The other thing too is the preservation of past usage and history. Everything around us has some kind of history, whether it's an old monument. So if you're kind of paying attention, you might get an idea of what we're talking about. You might start trying to guess through, okay, what's been repurposed before. And a lot of things do. Now, it just depends on what we're trying to preserve, right? Now, for a lot of historic things, we tend to want to preserve them in the way they are, right? We may do some maintenance just to make sure that it doesn't rot, decay away, all that fun jazz. That especially comes with like older buildings, historic sites. It just depends, right? But that also would be part of your scope management and understanding that, because you also have to understand the reason why it's so important to preserve, right? If we look at, again, the virtual case files for the FBI, they had to preserve old data as well, because that data is still relevant, probably even to this day. And especially when the virtual case file project became a thing, because when you have old data that can link to new cases, new whatever, it's very important that it's preserved, or else you're going to lose that, and then you have no validity to bring that person to justice in the case of the FBI. But for the case of something historic, it's a very different situation, because we have to understand why. And so, with that said, those two items that we just talked about plays a huge role in when we go into the phase of collecting requirements. So we have to understand repurposing and what does that mean? And we also have to understand the preservation and why we have to preserve something, which of course leads us into now our topic.
An estimated 40% of Americans are descended from immigrants that passed through Ellis Island. That's a lot of Americans. The first Ellis Island immigration station opened on January 1st, 1892 in New York Harbor to manage the increasing number of migrants coming to America. In that first year, a record number of nearly 450,000 people passed through to enter the United States. By the time Ellis Island closed in 1954, that number had reached 12 million, although most of those people arrived by 1920.